Do you remember when Star Trek used to be about exploring the idea of a utopian society? When it was about the very best of humanity? How we could look to the future and be hopeful for how we could all make the world a better place through diplomacy, intellect, unity, friendship, acceptance, empathy. Instead, now you watch a Star Trek movie and it ends with Starfleet Captain Rachel Garrett telling the former emperor of the fascist Terran Empire that she's a bad bitch. And that is a direct quote.
You're a bad bitch.
Hope you guys appreciate this t-shirt. I feel like it is perfect for a Star Trek review. The bizarre thing about this movie is that it wasn't as terrible or as really bad as I thought it might be. I mean, yes, it is completely detached from what I think that Star Trek should be, and we'll get into that in a minute. Yes, it does have completely abysmal camera work and terrible digitally post-produced zooms. Yes, the story is a bit kind of weird, has some problems. Yes, it is full of exposition. But if you're somehow able to detach this into a weird, non-Star Trek related vacuum, it's like, it's not terrible. I was watching this thinking it would be the worst piece of cinema that I have ever seen in my life. I was ready to throw out the half-star rating, but I actually wasn't bored by this. Some of the characters I kind of liked, and some of the story I was sort of interested in. If this was just a random sci-fi movie that I chucked on, maybe I would give it the benefit of the doubt. Yes, it's still not great, but the weird thing is, for this to be considered the 14th film in the Star Trek franchise, it is just so far removed from what Star Trek is meant to be. Just jumping back a little bit, I know some hardline Star Trek fans don't like it, but as somebody who is a genuine fan of the original series, I really love the 2009 film reboot of Star Trek. Directed by J.J. Abrams and with Alex Kurtzman co-writing the script, and yes, he is the guy that I would blame for ruining Star Trek in the last 8 years. I actually love that movie, and I think it's really good. I think it was the perfect way to adapt Star Trek to modern audiences through blockbuster filmmaking. But since then, and looking at this movie, Section 31, along with every other TV series that's come since, apart from maybe like Picard, still not a great series, but all of them just seem like a really worse, cheaper version of that 2009 film. The at times shakier surveillance camera sort of style footage, the lens flares, the sleeker, darker, more modern production design. Look, all of that works with a $150 million budget behind it, but not so much when it comes to TV. Star Trek Section 31 just feels like an incredibly strange copy of a copy of a copy, stemming all the way back to that 2009 reboot. It feels like the people behind this movie, Alex Kurtzman especially, think that that's what Star Trek is meant to be. It's meant to be shaky cameras, it's meant to be lens flares, it's meant to be dark rooms. But have they completely forgotten about the very best of the franchise? For a bit of context, Section 31 follows Emperor Philippa Georgiou. She's a character from Star Trek Discovery, which is a recent sort of modern Star Trek series, as she rejoins Section 31, which is like a sort of secret agent FBI sort of division of Starfleet. So yeah, she joins them in order to go and try and track down and destroy this weapon of mass destruction that she had built many years ago. So yeah, she joins this ragtag group of misfits working for Section 31, and they all work together to have to search for this weapon and destroy it. These characters are just so weird. There's this Vulcan appearing guy, but he doesn't act like a Vulcan at all. He's got all these full emotions because he's actually a robot piloted by this tiny, tiny little creature inside his head that can also fly around. And that's really on the nose because it feels like for the promotional marketing, they were like, oh yeah, we've got to include a Vulcan because Star Trek has those people with pointy ears, right? Because let's be real, if you didn't have him in the promotional material, nothing of this looks anything like Star Trek, and your old Star Trek fans are not going to recognize this as Star Trek at all. So they were like, yep, we've got to put a Vulcan in there, guys. But yeah, he doesn't even act like a Vulcan. There's this British guy who's got like a mech suit. There's a Cameloid who's like a shapeshifter, but for me, that really doesn't fit into the Star Trek universe because he seems exactly like a changeling, and also at the same time, his ability is completely underused throughout the whole film. And of course, also, it features Rachel Garrett, who, for Star Trek nerds like myself, we know her as a future captain of the US Enterprise, and she's featured in that very famous Star Trek Next Generation episode called Yesterday's Enterprise. It absolutely frustrates me to no end that these characters talk and act like modern people do today. And yes, the showrunners would probably say, oh, we're doing this to appeal to a modern audience, but they've completely forgotten that Star Trek was meant to be about looking forward to a utopian society. How are humans in the future going to act in an evolved way? It's not meant to look back at humanity now and promote sort of degeneracy. They're all swearing their heads off. I really, really hate that.
What the shit, man?
You want to hear another quote from this film? Chaos is my friend with benefits. From Starfleet Captain Rachel Garrett. Man. I mean, far out. These characters, they literally go and torture someone for information, and it's played as like a comedic scene. Can you imagine if Captain Jean-Luc Picard knew that there were sections of Starfleet going and torturing people for information?
No!
That'd be like a whole 2-part episode in The Next Generation where they'd be discussing and contemplating the moral implications of doing that. But here, it's just a complete bastardization of what Star Trek is really meant to be about.
What the shit, man?
I can't believe that is played for laughs. It's not right. It is not right. And yeah, overall, like, the story, you know, it is kind of entertaining, I guess, a little bit. Like, I was sort of interested in Philippa Georgiou's kind of background, how she was, you know, having to do all this evil stuff in her childhood, and then now she's kind of having to face the consequences a little bit. But, you know, I feel like she never really truly redeems herself here. She's still kind of an evil, nasty person, but the end of the movie plays it as like, oh, look at these misfits, like, you know, they're still helpful to society, but they're still acting in pretty nasty, mean ways, and it sort of just glorifies that behavior. It's just an attitude that I don't like, that does seem common across some modern films where it's sort of romanticizing these nasty, sassy, mean people. Whereas me, I don't know if it's just me, but I want to go to a movie, or I want to stream a movie where the characters are actually likable. They're people that I would want to be friends with. Is that weird? But yeah, completely separate from all the story stuff, this has some completely mind-boggling cinematography choices. Like, have a look at an example of one of the zooms they add in.
What is that? What is that?
It is completely pointless. It makes the scene feel really janky. Why? Why did someone think that was a good idea? That kind of camera work, I think, can work in a Star Trek movie when it's, you know, from really far away and it's like shooting some kind of action. But when you're in a room with 2 or 3 people talking, Why would the camera move like that? It just makes no sense. And a terrible part about it as well is it's not even like a practical zoom with a camera lens, it's added in post-production. It just makes it look so cheap. And speaking of cheap, the rest of the titles in this film and the graphics just really looked like a fan film. It sounds harsh to say, but then at the same time, there's some moments here where there's like some huge explosions, some quite big set pieces where I'm like, wow, okay, the budget here was actually, must have been high to get like some quality looking results like that. I was quite impressed with how some of it looked, but then it's like they deliberately go and cheapen other parts. It just seemed like really strange filmmaking choices. Probably one of the worst settings in this whole movie is Philippa Georgiou's space station, which seems like it's desperately trying to be part of Star Wars rather than Star Trek. It was terrible, and of course it suffers from the same problem that all of these modern Star Trek shows suffer from. Everything is in darkness because shadows are so cool, right guys? You know, they've completely forgotten about how in original Star Trek all the ships had really nice even lighting. They looked like pleasant spaces to be in, but no, everything's got to be dark. All the lights have to be dimmed because I guess people think that's more cinematic, right? There is some really silly writing. Some of the choreography just doesn't feel right. They're sort of throwing hands and then somehow somebody overpowers someone, but it just happens in a flash and the camera work's really shaky, so you can't actually see what's going on. There was also, if I'm putting on my nitpicking hat, they had this device that lets people phase through walls or objects so they can walk through anything, but they never explain why the hell don't they just fall through the floor, because if you've suddenly be able to pass through anything, wouldn't you just directly fall down and go into space? So that doesn't make sense. And yeah, the technology has all this random modern stuff that just feels completely out of touch with the Star Trek universe as I knew it. If this video gets 50 likes, I'll go through and do a whole ranking video of every single Star Trek movie, because I could just go on talking about old Star Trek, new Star Trek, but I don't have time for that in this video today, so drop a like if you want to see that. But yeah, overall, as a standalone sci-fi movie, I wasn't completely bored, but let's be real guys, this isn't a standalone sci-fi movie. This is Star Trek, and as Star Trek, this is offensive to what Star Trek is meant to be. So I'm gonna have to give Star Trek Section 31 1.5 stars out of 5. Something that Disney actually got right with Star Wars was embracing the sort of nostalgic technology. It's kind of janky how it is in the old movies, and then how it is in the modern Disney films does actually feel kind of congruent. But when it comes to Star Trek, modern Star Trek and old Star Trek just feels like it's set in two completely separate universes, and that is sad, because Star Trek was once a great thing. It inspired me to fall in love with science fiction. It showed the best side of humanity and made me an optimist about human nature and what we can do when we unify everyone and try to make the world a better place. But sadly, it seems like now Star Trek is just incapable of spreading or even exploring that message in any way, shape, or form. And that is truly sad.